This is the Master Brewers Podcast, brought to you by the Master Brewers Association of the Americas, a volunteer organization dedicated to continually improving the products and processes of our membership since 1887.
Let's go!
Master Brewers brings you interviews with the industry's best and brightest in brewing science, technology, and operations.
Calm down, I'm moving too fast.
This Master Brewers podcast is proudly sponsored by Hopsteiner, a global leader in the hop industry focused on quality, sustainability, and innovation in new hop varieties and hop products. Contact our brewery sales team to provide you with the hop-related tools you need to craft your next great beer. For more information, visit hopsteiner.com. This Master Brewers podcast is proudly sponsored by Barnum Mechanical, a full-service design build firm specializing in turnkey process and utility systems for the brewing industry. You know beer. We know breweries.
How do I comply? What the heck is this thing called Fsma?
You know, the smallest breweries are supposed to start complying with Fsma by September, I believe, 18th or 19th of this year.
This week on the show, the Food Safety Modernization Act. How to comply, where to go for resources, and who to ask for help when it comes to making food safety part of your brewery's culture.
My name is Doug Hindman. I'm with Elliott Bay Brewing Company in Seattle, Washington. We have 3 brew pub operations, and I've been with them since 1997.
Hi, my name is Tatiana Lorca, and I'm the Food Safety and Quality Program Leader for the Global Food and Beverage Group within Ecolab.
Tatiana, I bet there are still some brewers out there who aren't familiar with the Food Safety Modernization Act or how it's going to affect their brewery. Could you explain what exactly is Fsma?
Well, Fsma is this new law, food safety law, that was passed in 2011, and it's taken a while to actually make its way into final rules for the food industry. And it's the biggest rehash or overhaul of the U.S. food safety legislation that we've had since the 1938 U.S. Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So what basically this law is doing is improving the safety of U.S. foods by helping the industry become much more proactive in the way that they think about how they manufacture food. So implementing proactive food safety programs, also addressing imported ingredients and finished goods. And this law pertains primarily to FDA regulated facilities.
Now, there's probably a handful of incredulous brewers out there, still confused because they say, well, wait a second, but beer isn't the same thing as food. Why don't you comment on that?
Yeah, actually, they are quite wrong because beer is food, and because the FDA has said so. And along with the publication of Fsma came this statement that includes beer and alcoholic beverages in general as one of the items that are included within the definition of food by the FDA.
Okay, and maybe comment too, hopefully by now everyone realizes that breweries are required, mandated to register with the FDA, but that's kind of the very first step in this whole process, right?
Absolutely. So breweries have to register with the FDA because just like any business which produces, holds, or packs human food or animal food, they have to do so. And what this registration does is alerts the FDA that they exist and gives the FDA a physical location so that they know where the brewery or the food business is located. That way, if there is any kind of issue they know where to find the business and then potentially remove unsafe food from the marketplace.
What about somebody like you, Doug, who's got 3 different brew pubs to keep up with? Do you have to register each of those as a separate food facility?
Yes, we do. And I believe it was under the Bioterrorism Act that kind of kicked that off for brewing facilities. I imagine wineries and distilleries, and cideries as well. But yeah, and I believe it's every 2 years you have to renew your registration. So kind of the first time through, you get a number that is associated with your facility, and then there's the renewal is quite simple. Once you have gone through it the first time and have that number, you can do it online in about 10 minutes.
Tatiana, we often hear that beer is low risk. Why should brewers be concerned about food safety?
I think one of the biggest concerns with beer and food safety is that there is a potential for physical and chemical hazards and what we call other hazards. So chemical could be using an unapproved, unsafe ingredient in the product. Physical hazard would be the inclusion of glass or other foreign material inside of the bottle or can, and which can cause illness or injury to the consumer. And then what we classify as other would be cases where you have a secondary fermentation, which happens inside of the container, and this can cause an explosion of the container in the hands of the customer.
Doug, talk to us about spent grain handling and what brewers need to do now to comply.
You have to label the barrels. You have to ensure that they're clean. You have to put them in a designated area so they can't be confused with some other
trash
garbage
barrels
container
or something,
that someone might dump oil or glass into, for example. So I mean, the hurdles aren't that high, but there are hurdles, and they're just a few boxes you need to tick in order to find yourself in compliance.
There's actually guidance that's written specifically about this on the FDA website. FDA has a page, a whole section specifically dedicated to Fsma, and this question of how to handle spent grains is answered fairly well in a nice guidance document.
Doug, let's talk about the never-ending quest to put the next weirdest thing in beer and where the government fits into that equation.
Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly brewers are an innovating bunch, and they like to try new ingredients, and whether it's peanut butter or squid ink or glitter, but and none of those particular things are necessarily forbidden. They require a brewer to go through formula approval, which you're submitting a paperwork to the TTB and explaining your process, and also you have to provide some paper trail about the ingredient that you're adding and ensuring that that's approved for consumption. And it's not impossible to do, but I think what happens is a lot of brewers just forge ahead, and beer's on the shelf and being consumed, and they've got a Facebook post about it before anyone's ever thought about a formula approval. So it's and that is my understanding is that you need to submit and receive approval of that formula before
you sell it.
Before you sell it. Yeah. So we're putting in many cases putting the beer cart before the formula approval horse.
Tatiana, let's talk about food safety when it comes to selling beer to large retail chains.
What we're seeing from specific retailers is that they tend to have either their own food safety requirements or their own food safety audit that they require to be carried out at a facility, breweries included.
So Tatiana, if I'm If I'm a brewery and I'm trying to sell to Whole Foods or Costco or one of these retailers that has these requirements, are they bringing in their own people to do this audit, or is this a third party audit, or how does that work?
I'd say it completely depends on the business. Some companies have their own people do, like Costco, from my understanding, a lot of the food safety audits that they do are done by their own internal audit team. But other groups will rely on third-party audits. So they would be sending a food safety auditor into a brewery to do an audit. And one of the things that I remind folks fairly regularly is that many of these people are used to going into high-risk operations or high food safety risk operations. And so they're coming in with a very different set of eyes into a brewery. And they may or may not understand exactly what's going on inside the brewery.
Coming up.
Regardless of size and regardless of who you're selling to, you still have to prove that your product is safe, and you have to have the documentation to prove it.
I'm John Bryce, and you're listening to the Master Brewers Podcast from the Master Brewers Association of the Americas. This episode is brought to you by
ABS Commercial is a full-service brewery and parts outfitter. From our Raleigh headquarters to our Denver office, we proudly offer brew houses and fermenters from 3 barrels and up, yeast brinks, boilers, kegs, chillers, tri-clamp, and other stainless parts, all with the quickest delivery and lead times in the industry. Learn more at abs-commercial.com or call 877-BREW-ABS. ABS Commercial. We are brewers.
And here's what's coming up on the Master Brewers calendar. The District Michigan Summer Social is July 7th at Fitzgerald Park in Grand Ledge. District Northern California meets at Admiral Maltings in Alameda July 19th. Don't miss the Brewery Safety Webinar July 25th. District St. Paul, Minneapolis joins forces again with the Minnesota Craft Brewers Guild for the 5th Annual Business and Technical Conference July 27th in Duluth. The annual District Texas Summer Meeting is the weekend of August 3rd in Kerrville. The ASBC MBAA Brewing Summit takes place in San Diego this August. Discounted early bird registration closes June 19th. Register at mbaa.com, where you can also view the full count of events with more details or find a district meeting near you. Now back to the show. Let's talk about documentation. I'm guessing there are brewers out there who are doing a lot of the right things, but not necessarily documenting them. Why don't you talk about the importance of doing that?
It's from the food safety inspector's point of view. I think it's super important that that you write down what you're doing so that you can prove that you've done the right thing. From the point of view of an auditor or an inspector, if it wasn't written down, it didn't happen. There has to be some kind of documented evidence that you did what you said you were going to do. Doug?
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that could be super helpful is having all this stuff organized. So you kind of have some sort of filing system in place that can pull this off a shelf or find exactly where the file is on your server or your computer, because nothing raises red flags, I think, for the inspectors than somebody just fumbling around in their own system and not being able to locate these things when they're being asked. You may have them, you may have all those things perfectly documented, but if you're having to spend 20 minutes finding the piece of paper that the inspector's looking for, it can cause them to dig deeper in other areas that just appear disorganized and unable to give them what they want.
I'd say documenting is super important always as well, because you have to prove that you're doing the right thing. And even though it might seem like a pain in the rear end to have to write things down, it's one of the best ways to protect your business is to have that proof that you did the right thing.
Let's talk about low-hanging fruit. What are some easy food safety wins that we can all go after and check off the list?
Yeah, no, in our brewery, some of the things we went after right away was not allowing food in the brewing or in the brew house, any place where there might be exposure to product. I was guilty of that, and people would eat on the fly while they're sparging or something, and we just had to. We ended up creating another space outside of the product exposed area where people could sit and eat. Cell phones was another one that I know. We're not certainly not the only brewery that battles that, but having that a distraction from what you're doing, and it's another source of glass that could be broken and find its way into product. And glass in general, we had pint glasses and Pyrex glassware that we would collect samples with, and just kind of starting to look around and see what's here and how can I do it differently. Another one, we had wooden oars was what we didn't have. We don't have rakes in our mash tun, so being in Seattle, we have lots of marine supply places. So you run down to the marine supply store and grab your laminated wooden oar, and off you go. And of course, that stuff's the wood's peeling, the ends cracking, the laminate is making its way into a hot environment where it's delaminating, and so we got rid of the wooden oar. And
so what'd you replace it with? Do you now have a nice polypropylene canoe paddle instead, or what?
We found some stainless ones that work well. I mean, our mash tuns are not that terribly deep, so we're brewing like 7 and 10 barrels. So the stainless ones we were able to find worked fine for us.
All right. So I think one of the common themes here. I'm sure there's a lot of brewers that are going to just say, well, okay, hey, where do I find all these new rules? And not everyone has a whole work week to spend sorting this out. What should they do?
We point them right to both the MBAA website and the BA website. The two groups came together in the last few months, and they created this document called Brewers' Responsibilities and Obligations under the U.S. Food Safety Modernization Act. And it's a great 3-page PDF that's posted to both websites, and it contains active links to different parts of the regulation, and I think does a pretty good job of explaining what the requirements are for a brewery, and does it in a way that is not very intimidating and provides enough detail for brewers.
Okay, great.
I'd say another place that's with that document in hand. There's the FDA has put out a food safety plan builder. So it's a piece of software that can serve as sort of a guide to building your own food safety plan. And there's a lot of templates on there, and you just begin adding the things that are relevant to your business. So it's kind of a centralized place to organize some of your documents.
And it's free.
It's free.
That's right. Okay, as brewers go through these documents, they'll notice that there are actually quite a few exemptions or subparts that you don't have to comply with if you're just making traditional beer. But I'd like to talk about some of the scenarios that might trigger additional obligations. Any watch-outs you want to mention there?
Yeah, I think breweries that are also making sodas, they're exempt from doing the hazard analysis work if the sale of those soft drinks is less than 5% of their gross sales. So that may be something folks want to keep an eye on if that starts to become a bigger and bigger part of their business. That let's say cross that 5% threshold, they do have to comply in a different way and in a more rigorous way.
And you essentially have to have a HACCP plan in that scenario, right?
In essence, yes. Breweries will need to understand where they fall into the continuum. Are they strictly a brew pub, or in Doug's case, are they a brew pub that sells beer to sister pubs, so a production facility, and really understand those aspects, and also understand the aspects of their size, how their size affects their how the rules apply to them. Because if they fall into this very special category, which is called qualified facilities, they still have to prove that. So a qualified facility would be an itty bitty little business like a mom and pop brewery that would sell directly to consumers or sell to a local retail within, I think it's 275 miles of their location and within the same state. They need to understand what these nuances are so that they understand what they have to do. So to me, it comes down to the fact that regardless of size and regardless of who you're selling to, you still have to prove that your product is safe. And so you have to make a product that's safe, that's not adulterated, and you have to have the documentation to prove it.
That was Tatiana Lorca and Doug Hindman from the Master Brewers Food Safety Committee.
I'd encourage listeners of the podcast, if they have questions, to submit questions to Ask the Brewmaster on MBAA.com. The food safety team the food safety committee will answer those questions, and happy to provide support.
Calm down, I'm moving too fast.
I'm really looking forward to the ASBC MBAA Brewing Summit coming up this August in San Diego. It only happens every 4 years, and it's not like any other conference you've attended. The Brewing Summit is 100% the science and technology of brewing. No pep rallies or business lectures, and you'll be surrounded by some of the smartest men and women in our industry. If you can only attend one conference in 2018, this should be it. Register now at mbaa.com.
And maybe 3 things that I should have mentioned, but I did. My fist full of courage. My heart full of...
Yeah,
so
what's a brindle? I want one of those. What's that?
It's Randall's wife.